We have in the first chapter things that are left over from the era of positivist research, experimental design research, heavily quantitative research, called limitations, delimitations, and assumptions. These are three sections that I have in my book. We still often see in proposals. I'm not going to go into what those are, but I mean, they're basically you taking a look at your methodology and trying to say, well, you know, how likely is it that my conclusions are going to be wrong because of the way I've designed my study and because of the methodology I've chosen. And included in that are assumptions. Assumptions you're making in order to do the study. I find to me, the assumption parts are really important. There's no dissertation, actually I don't think there's any research that is free from the potential of error. So basically the assumptions are the things that you're trying to think through and say, okay, I'm going to end up concluding some things about my topic and from my data, but what's the possibility that I'm making some false assumptions that lead me astray? I mean, in terms of just sort of basic statistical kind of research, you know, a lot of in the near center can tell us a lot more about this than I can, but you know, most statistical procedures are based on assumptions of normal distributions. So that's an assumption that may be violated when you collect your data. So that's just a tiny kind of thing. Okay, so then the final, I think it's the final section, that you would put into this first chapter, this convention chapter, is another very important part. And that's, why should anybody care about your study? Why is it important? It's really important to wrestle with that. And it goes back to Heather's statement about being passionate about something. I mean, if you're ambivalent about your topic, then, gee, why are you spending so much energy and toil on it? So you should be able to make a case. In fact, I find that in some proposal meetings, that's something the committee ends up doing for the proposal, is actually helping the student build the case for it. I should say also that these committee meetings are not things to be feared, because by and large they're collaborative. I mean, they're intended to be helpful. There are all the horror stories, but not many of them. You know, I've been on committees that have said no to a proposal because it wasn't ready, and it wasn't. I've also been on the oral defense is the final part of this. I've been on some committees like that where the student had to go back and, in some cases, spend another 6 months or more working on their study to get it right. But those are rare. I mean, generally they're conversational in nature. And you know, most of the ones that I participate in, I see as enjoyable.
They want you to succeed. They don't want you to fail. They're not out to, you know, put you down or anything like that. It's, you know, and the proposal is usually closed door. It's usually just yourself and the committee. And then the defense is usually open door. Usually they invite faculty and other grad students. In fact, today, one of my colleagues defended and walked in there, Justin, and came out Dr. Smith. So, yeah, it's pretty neat.
I think I'm only going to talk about 2 more things quickly. The rest of this proposal would be the literature review chapter. Okay, the literature review chapter in a qualitative study is always up for grabs. How long is it? How thorough is it? Does it even exist? In a quantitative study, you want to have a literature review that's reasonably substantial. In a qualitative study where you're going to use the literature to help you analyze the data, then it may not even show up as a part of your proposal. That's pretty much up to you and your advisor as to how you're going to play that if you're doing a phenomenological study, for example. So But the traditional convention and the easiest convention is to have that second chapter be a lit review. So we've got introductory chapter, got the literature review chapter, and then we have the third chapter, which is the methodology. So that should lay it out pretty well as to what you want to do. Okay, I'm only going to talk about one more thing, then I want Heather to quickly talk about her study, and then we'll see what sorts of things are on your minds. The last thing I want to talk about is objectivity. And I don't think it does anybody any good to have already concluded how the world works when they start their study. So it's not a good, I mean, I've had plenty of students come to me and say, well, I think this is the best educational program that's ever been invented, and I'm going to go out and prove it. They're already biased. And you want to try to guard yourself against bias. You're after being objective. And so that's an expectation of most supervisory committees and advisors, that in fact you will be dispassionate and objective about trying to answer a question that needs to be answered, and not make assumptions about the answers. So I can't give you any. Well, I mean, sometimes Heather said don't take gift topics, and that's one of the reasons, because usually a gift topic is a topic that's already, whoever's giving it to you wants you to find out something. I mean, they've already said, basically, these are the conclusions I want you to come to. I can think of an example for a person who worked for Gallup. And the Gallup organization has, what is that thing called, that personality? Strength Finder. So this person set out to use Strength Finder in a way that would prove its value to Gallup, not to determine whether the instrument itself did what it was supposed to do. It was already assumed that it did what it was supposed to. That's not a very clear example, but this particular student ran into a problem of objectivity. So, any observations, questions at this point? Because I thought it would be useful to ask Heather Heather's got a great proposal, and I've got copies of the first few pages. And you have, I don't know if you want to mess around with the technology, but you can share these.
Yeah. So,
I only have a limited copy, so you'll have to share.
I don't have to mess around with technology, but my proposal, I found my topic by reviewing the textbook I use for teaching AgLec 202, which is basically leadership theory. I'm looking at authentic leadership. It's fairly new. It's only been around maybe about 10, 12 years. Well, the concept's been around since the 70s, but it's been starting to be researched recently. And it was a brand new chapter in our updated textbook, and so I was reading through it, and I read through the criticisms, and it said that more research needed to be done on authentic leadership and whether or not it can predict these positive organizational outcomes. And that just resonated with me. I was like, okay, make sure when you're looking at criticisms and critiques and areas for future research, make sure your literature's current, because if you see something from 1984, probably it's been already researched, maybe. But anyway, I took that to my advisor, and because I came back, it was during the summer, and I had a list of stuff, and I said, this really resonates with me. And she asked me why. I said, well, because I believe in the theory of authentic leadership. It stems from three leadership theories: ethical, transformational, and servant, which are highly researched. And I understand positive organizational outcomes because of my work in the business world. And so I had to narrow down what positive organizational outcomes I was going to look at. And that was tough because I had about 7 of them. And I went in and did the research and found out that if it predicts this one, it also predicts this one. So I had to sort that all out. And the thing is, my advisor knew that, but she says, you may want to look and see if it does.